Hey there, besties. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we're continuing our recap of the manhwa, Lucia. If you're new to this series, check the description below for links to previous episodes. Lastly, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoy the video. It really helps our channel grow. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get started. Draft sum. 7 in total. I'll leave the choice to you. Head out as soon as preparations are finished, Duke Hugo commanded Elliot. Yes, Your Excellency, Elliot replied with a bow. Ashen watched them quietly, his tension lingering. It's been a while since I last went hunting, Duke Hugo said softly, wearing a smirk. Human hunting, Ashen thought, observing the Duke as chills ran down his body. Geez, I might have a nightmare tonight, Ashen thought inwardly as Elliot walked past him, leaving the room. Seriously, the Black Lionel. I wonder who came up with such a glamorized title, he thought, watching the Duke get back to work. A few years ago, Ashen unintentionally followed Duke Hugo to the battlefield. He still feared that the visions from that day would haunt his dreams. How can a human head come off so easily? It looked so fluid and effortless that it felt surreal, Ashen thought, his eyes wide with fear as he watched the battle from atop his horse. Back then, His Excellency didn't resemble a black lion. Calling him the Grim Reaper would have been generous. The creature that smiled casually with a face covered in blood was the devil himself. The scariest thing about him is that he can hide the insanity within by acting like a distinguished noble who has never held a weapon in his life, Ashen thought calmly. Will you be gone for a while? Ashen asked Duke Hugo. I won't know until I get there, but it seems so, Duke Hugo replied. In that case, the young master may arrive during your absence, Ashen told him. Duke Hugo went quiet, his hand against his chin. You go and get him, he told Ashen. Pardon? Me? Ashen asked, jolting with fear. And make sure to warn him on your way back. He'd better properly respect his mother. If I hear that anything was amiss when I return. Duke Hugo began, his tone cold, but was cut short by Ashen's polite interjection. Yes, I'll make sure there's nothing for you to worry about, Ashen said, gasping, his hands trembling. Later, the Duke was alone in his office, the rain still pouring heavily. According to regular reports from the Academy, Damien hadn't inherited his father's foolishly generous nature, but he hadn't shown any signs of cruelty either. Originally, I was going to kill him the first day I met him. I probably would have gone through with it if his eyes hadn't so closely resembled those of my brother, Duke Hugo thought. However, no matter how docile his father was, and even if he is only 8 years old, he is a descendant of House Turan. Compared to him, Vivian is like a gentle rabbit, he mused, Lucia's cheerful face flashing through his mind. In my absence, if he harms Vivian in any way at all. Duke Hugo thought, unable to conclude his punishment. His gaze shifted to the sunrise through the window. Ever since becoming the Duke, I've kept one absolute rule: give back as much as I receive. I refused to accept any romantic feelings because I was unable to reciprocate them. After living as the beast called Hui, I finally became a proper human being when I met my brother. But I had to pay the price for learning about emotions. I loved my brother, and for that, I had to obey the wishes of the late Duke who held my brother's life in his hands. The tragic death of my brother took away my sole reason to live. When I learned about the secret of House Turan's bloodline after the late Duke's death, my resentment for the blood that flowed in my veins grew every day. It pushed me into the depths of darkness. Nobody and nothing can affect my will, Duke Hugo thought boldly, his resolve unchanging. The sensation of feeling completely helpless was terribly miserable. My heart must stay strong and my mind must be sure. I can't let anyone become special to me. My brother's loss was enough. I don't want to live with the anxiety that comes with the fear of losing something important to me. That's why, he thought calmly, picturing Lucia's face. He continued his writing, attending to his work. As he wrote, a memory from his last encounter with Lucia surfaced. You don't love me. I will never love you. Is there anything between us? How long do you think this kind of relationship can last? Lucia's voice echoed through his thoughts. Your Excellency, Jerome called, causing the Duke to pause his work. How would you like to have your dinner? Jerome inquired. There's no need to prepare it. I'll be leaving soon, Duke Hugo told him, shaking his head. But it's quite late. Why not leave early tomorrow morning? Jerome asked, tensing up. No, I will leave as soon as things are ready. I've already declared my plans, Duke Hugo replied. Then what about the madam? Jerome inquired. You tell her in my stead, Duke Hugo responded. Jerome observed Duke Hugo calmly. Did she commit some kind of atrocious offense? He asked, with a serious look. Duke Hugo watched him, unsure about the question. Madam, please let me examine you today, Anna pleaded, her tears startling Lucia as she stood at her room's entrance. His Excellency summons me every night and asks about your condition. Please help me, Anna begged, her hands clasped. Anna, Lucia called out, looking tense. He definitely told me that I can do whatever I want as far as treatment. But he still sends Anna to me every day, Lucia thought, watching the pleading doctor. Then again, it's not like Anna's done anything wrong, she reasoned. Come in, Lucia said calmly. Madam, thank you, Anna said, beaming with joy, her eyes lighting up. He's probably in the office right now. Maybe I'll go in there and smack him. I can't help but feel like he's underestimating me, Lucia thought, her expression straight as she folded her fist. The rain poured heavily outside the castle. You must be honest in telling me about all of your symptoms, madam, Anna said calmly, holding her book to take notes. Lucia observed her silently. Fine, this time, I'll do what you want, she thought with a strong resolve. During my first menstrual cycle, Lucia began. She told the doctor all that had transpired leading to her not seeing her menstrual cycle. Time passed as she narrated her story. I apologize, madam, Anna said gently, concluding her writing. I knew it, she doesn't know of a cure, Lucia thought. It's all right, Anna, she told the doctor warmly. None of the renowned and prominent doctors I met in my dream knew of a cure. If it hadn't been for that traveling doctor, I would never have known either, Lucia thought. But of course, I don't plan to use the treatment method he taught me. But if Anna were to find out about it, I wonder if the fortune that found me in my dream will find me here once more, she mused, observing Anna groaning slightly. To be honest, I am not sure how to treat your condition. However, I promise you that I will find a way, Anna said with boldness in her voice. Lucia watched her, looking taken aback. What? Duke Hugo shouted, sounding perplexed at Jerome's words. I hope that you will forgive the madam, even if she made a mistake. You haven't spoken a word to her for several days now, Jerome said. It's none of your business. Don't forget your place, Duke Hugo told him, turning his face away from Jerome's gaze, flinching a bit. Yes, and I will forget my place again to say this for once, Jerome said, leaning forward, perplexing the Duke. The madam is the lady of this dukedom. She is different from the other women you've met before, so you must treat her with more affection. She came to this desolate north where she has no acquaintances, yet she never complained about the difficulties of living here. If you neglect her, she will truly be alone here. Lately Jerome began before being abruptly interrupted by Duke Hugo. Shut your mouth. The Duke shouted, silencing Jerome. Your Excellency, Jerome said calmly. Don't you dare say one more word, Duke Hugo told him, his serious look startling Jerome. Duke Hugo clenched his fists angrily. I've known that Jerome takes especially good care of my wife, but now he's going so far as to interfere in our relationship. He never gets unnecessarily involved in other matters, so why? It's annoying, Duke Hugo thought. How tactful. Did she tell you to come provoke me? He asked Jerome, wearing a smirk. Jerome was stunned by the Duke's allegations. No, Your Excellency, she would never, Jerome said. Duke Hugo threw a cup at him, but Jerome dodged, making it shatter upon impact with the ground. I told you to shut your mouth, Duke Hugo said angrily, standing against his desk. He stepped away, passing Jerome, who stood frozen and physically tensed. Duke Hugo slammed the door hard as he left his office. Jerome remained still, mute and unsure of what had just transpired between them. He collapsed on the floor. He didn't throw the cup at my face. He was holding back, Jerome thought, picking up the pieces of the broken cup. Shame on me. I feel apologetic to the madam. My meddling made matters worse, Jerome thought with a sigh, holding his head in confusion. Outside the castle, The sun was setting as Duke Hugo walked gently across the hallway. Images of his encounter with Jerome flashed through Duke Hugo's mind. I already know that she would never do such a thing, he thought. He recalled Jerome's advice against neglecting Lucia so she wouldn't get lonely. I am also well aware, Duke Hugo thought, holding his face. He paused his walk. I am the one who knows her best. It took Fabian an entire month to write up a report about her, but there was no mention of her condition. The fact that she isn't able to bear any children. It was a secret that she kept to herself. She built up the courage to reveal her secret to me, and I laughed at it back then, he thought, holding his face in shame. Vivian, he muttered, his mind going back to their last encounter. There will be no divorce, Duke Hugo told Lucia, his tone harsh. All right, she said sadly. You are my wife, he insisted. Yes, Lucia replied, withdrawing into herself. No matter what kind of end you try to bring about, nothing will change our relationship, Duke Hugo asserted. Okay, Lucia said innocently, her demeanor growing sad. This caused the Duke to flinch, observing the change in her facial expression and calmness. He gently guided her, placing her in a chair. Lucia remained calm, her sadness visible. Do you even understand what you are agreeing to? Duke Hugo asked, his voice rising slightly. Lucia remained calm, observing him calmly. She shut her eyes, turning her gaze slightly away from him. Yes, she muttered. All this time, she hasn't left a single trace anywhere. It's as if she desires nothing and can leave whenever she wishes to without hesitation. Perhaps there is no place here where she can safely store her heart. I've finally obtained it. I have the perfect wife that I've been longing for. A wife who is obedient regardless of her own opinions. A duchess who desires nothing and stays in her place like a doll. An empty shell of a woman, Duke Hugo thought, still atop Lucia as he observed her. He fell silent inwardly. Darn it. Her heart shouldn't matter to me, so why? Why do I feel like this? He questioned himself, his facial expression melting. This is the worst. I am in love with her, he suddenly thought, causing him to flinch. No, he said inwardly, rising from the chair and freeing Lucia. I am beginning to be swayed by her. Now, I've begun to fear that I might lose her. Unbeknownst to me, she has captured my heart. That is absolutely unacceptable, Duke Hugo thought, stepping away from her. I cannot allow it, he told himself. Receive treatment, he said coldly, turning his gaze towards Lucia. She sat upright, observing him. We're back to the beginning again, she thought to herself. Tell the doctor about your symptoms and receive treatment. You should know what is going on with your own body, he told her harshly, trying hard to suppress his emotions. I could get pregnant. Did you change your mind about having a child? Lucia questioned. There will be no child, he told her firmly. Then, you wish to sleep in separate rooms? Lucia asked him. I will receive treatment, and you will continue to visit me in bed. So, what will you do if I get pregnant? She pressed further. If that were to happen, it wouldn't be my child, Duke Hugo replied with a sigh, absent-minded, his hand against his face. Realizing what he just said, Duke Hugo let go of his face, his eyes looking perplexed. Lucia's heart beat harder as she remained seated, watching him. I made a mistake, Duke Hugo thought. Vivian, what I mean was, he exclaimed, trying to explain himself. I suppose that means you will never acknowledge the child, or are you assuming that I will be unfaithful? Lucia asked him calmly, observing him. I have to apologize. I must comfort her, he thought, his facial expression turning sad. I need to tell her that this is a misunderstanding, he told himself, beads of sweat trickling down his tensed face. As for the treatment, you may do as you wish, Duke Hugo told her before walking away. Back in the hallway, Duke Hugo was still lost in thought. I wasn't able to deny it, so I ran away from the situation. The confusing mess of emotions that I'd never felt before was exhausting me, he thought, resuming his walk. He remembered Jerome's earlier question about whether Lucia had committed an atrocious offense. Duke Hugo's demeanor changed to a sad one. I'm the one who made a mistake, he said inwardly, admitting his wrongdoing. Outside the castle, Duke Hugo stepped into the garden. I ended up walking all the way here without thinking, he thought, surprised at himself. The sun will be setting soon, he thought, turning to leave the garden. I should return, he told himself. As he wandered further into the garden, his eyes scanning the surroundings as he passed. Eventually, he reached an entrance of the garden. Lucia stood with her back to him, and he could tell it was her from a distance. Duke Hugo paused for a moment, observing Lucia. He tried to turn away, but remained mute, clenching his fist tightly as he approached her gently. Lucia, hearing footsteps approaching, turned to face him. Duke Hugo stood still, watching her calmly. Lucia's eyes glistened as she observed him quietly, her facial expression perplexed. She continued watching him, then let out a smile, her expression growing happy. Duke Hugo watched her with a perplexed look. For a moment, it was as if everything aside from her was frozen in time, he thought. Oh, and I felt the uneasiness and anxiety that had been pestering me melt away in a second. I see, Duke Hugo muttered to himself. What I truly feared was not her existence that made me waver. Without a doubt, one thing is for sure, I simply do not want to lose this smile, he said inwardly, watching Lucia's smile. The weather is nice, isn't it? Lucia asked cheerfully. Look, the flowers will be blooming soon, won't they? Duke Hugo asked calmly as they strolled gently through the garden. They should be fully bloomed in a few days, Lucia replied. I see, he told her, trying to avoid her gaze. I heard you were busy. Did you come out for some fresh air? She inquired. I'm done with most of the urgent work. But there's other business to attend to, so I have to leave for a while, he said, stopping his walk and turning his gaze toward Lucia, causing her to flinch slightly. Oh my, I see, she said. How long will it take? Will you be away for a long time? She asked as they resumed their walk. I'm not sure exactly. It could take quite a while, Duke Hugo replied. Why are you out here alone? Where is your maid? He asked calmly. I sent her on an errand, Lucia told him. I wanted to have tea out here since the rain stopped. It's nice. Drinking tea after it rains is the best, Lucia said with a smile. Would you like to join me? She asked politely. The couple soon sat down together, enjoying their tea. The dry weather has had me worried lately, even if it was during the day. I'm just so glad that it rained, Lucia told him. Duke Hugo observed Lucia's facial expression quietly. He reached his hand towards hers on the table, calmly grasping it. Lucia's eyes glistened brightly as she watched him. How have you been? Duke Hugo asked calmly. Lucia observed him calmly, fidgeting slightly. I've just been the same as always. I tend to the garden and read books, she replied. This feels a bit odd. We're talking as if we haven't seen each other in a long time. But it's only been a few days, she added excitedly. Only a few days? He asked inwardly. I thought it felt extremely long. To think that I was the only one who was frantic while she was spending her days peacefully. How pathetic, he thought, still watching her quietly. At the same time, it's not like I wanted her to endure the same suffering as me. It makes me proud to see that she's holding up so well, but it also makes me a bit sad, Duke Hugo said inwardly, stroking Lucia's face gently with his hand. He touched her face delicately, his gaze unwavering. She's so frail. It feels as though I would leave a mark if I were to apply even the slightest amount of pressure. Yet, this frail and delicate person has been persistently threatening me, he admitted inwardly. Lucia enjoyed his touch as Duke Hugo continued to caress her face. That day, I said something I shouldn't have. I want to apologize to you. I wasn't trying to treat you like an unfaithful woman. Children are rare within House Taran. Conception is highly difficult. So, it will be difficult for you to get pregnant. I didn't want to give you hope only for you to be disappointed. But my wording was terrible. I'm sorry for hurting you like that, Duke Hugo told her calmly. Lucia observed him calmly as he gently squeezed her hand. I see. I'm all right, she said gently, trying to smile, but tears began to drip down her eyes. Duke Hugo was stunned by Lucia's sudden tears. Oh, Lucia exclaimed, realizing she was crying. Why? I was going to smile. What should I do? She questioned herself, unable to stop her tears. I'm sorry. I'll stop soon, Lucia told Duke Hugo, still smiling weakly as she tried to wipe away her tears with her hand. But she couldn't hold back her emotions, and her tears continued to flow, her expression growing increasingly sad. She sobbed loudly. "Vivian!" Duke Hugo shouted, getting up from his seat in a rush. "I'm sorry, it's all my fault," he said, trying to console her. "Until just a moment ago, before I ran into him, my heart was in turmoil. I was thinking of slapping him in the face if I saw him," Lucia thought, still in tears, her mind racing back to when Duke Hugo had approached her in the garden. But then she remembered that moment, her eyes widening as she recalled his actions. "But the moment I saw him, I felt the resentment that had been piling up in my heart melt away like salt in water. I think something similar happened before in the past. When was it?" she wondered, watching Duke Hugo quietly. Everything in the background began to blur, and only one person came into focus. "It's a surprising experience," she thought. "That's right, it was that day," Lucia thought, remembering the first time she saw Duke Hugo amidst the cheering crowd. Everyone was shouting while pollen flew around in the air. Yet, I could see only him among the crowd. It was as if he and I were the only ones left in the world, she reminisced, the memory vivid in her mind as it repeated again on that day. Lucia watched Duke Hugo's face, her own face turning red. "Oh," Lucia exclaimed. "I love you," she said inwardly, unable to hold back her emotions as she hugged Duke Hugo tightly, sobbing. "If he finds out that I have feelings for him, he will push me away. He'll send me roses. So I must hide my love and pretend everything is fine. I must smile, as I always do. I can't let him find out. I can't get caught," Lucia thought before smiling at him. "Vivian, I'm sorry. It's all my fault," Duke Hugo said anxiously. "I already forgave him, yet tears fall from my eyes. It's not because of the past pain but because of his kind words and the gentle hand caressing my cheek. They make me so happy that my heart aches," Lucia thought as Duke Hugo's hand was on her cheek. "Let's go back to how things were before, back to a few months ago. I don't care if this is a castle of sand that could collapse at any moment. For now, it's okay because there isn't a wave in sight. Nothing has been resolved, but I'll think about it later," Lucia thought, hugging Duke Hugo tightly. Tears dropped from her eyes. "I had felt so anxious while trying to deny my feelings, but I feel much better after acknowledging my feelings for him. I get to decide what's heaven or hell, at the very least. I'm sure he likes me. I don't know how he treated his past lovers, but I believe I'm a bit special to him. I need that much confidence to stay resolute while loving him. I have a special excuse. It's a justification that nobody before me had because I am legally his wife. I won't cling to him or become pathetic trying to please him. I won't get involved in a miserable love. I won't beg for his love. I'll stop trying so hard to be a gentle and obedient wife. I'll only do what I can. I'll love him just enough so that I won't come to hate either him or myself. I will stand on a level where I can meet his eyes as an equal partner. Has he ever been loved by a woman who doesn't cling to him? The thought that I could maybe surprise him makes me happy. Even if it takes my entire life, it's fine. If I can hear you say I love you one day, then I won't feel like my life had no purpose. If we live like this for a year, 5 years, or even 10 years, perhaps I can charm him little by little, like how rain slowly soaks through soil," she thought, still in his arms. Lucia shoved the Duke away, shocking him. "Do you admit that you were in the wrong?" she asked, her voice tense. "Huh? Yes," he replied, still perplexed. "I forgive you," Lucia said, stunning him further as he held the hem of her dress. "However, I have 2 conditions." "Conditions?" Duke Hugo thought. "What are they?" he inquired, looking tensed. "Firstly, I'd like a kiss of reconciliation," she said. Duke Hugo's eyes widened, and he smiled. "I'll gladly agree to this kind of condition," he thought as they kissed passionately, their tongues entwining. Lucia moaned, lost in the moment. "What's the second condition?" Duke Hugo asked with a smile as they stopped kissing. Lucia looked a bit sad. "I'd like to revise our contract. Your freedom of privacy means you'll openly cheat on me. If you have a lover on the side, please hide it from me," she said softly. "I won't cheat," he replied earnestly. "I've never even looked at another woman since our wedding," he thought. "If you come to hate me, start to get annoyed by me, or want to leave me for another woman, please tell me first. Don't make me hear it from someone else, she continued. Duke Hugo watched her, perplexed. It looks like I momentarily forgot that, in your eyes, I'm a lousy man. But I can't disagree, he said, holding her hand affectionately. While I'm trying hard to appear as a good man, the woman I love sees me as a horrible person. How ridiculous, he thought, kissing her hand. As you wish, he told her. Lucia's demeanor brightened as she heard the butler's call. Your Excellency, a butler announced from a distance, hand over his chest. Duke Hugo rose from his knees. What is it? He demanded, his tone serious. Sir Elliot has finished all preparations and is awaiting your orders, the butler informed him. Very well, Duke Hugo replied calmly. He paused, reflecting on his feelings for Lucia. I've realized my feelings for her, but I can't change anything immediately. I am still unable to make any promises to her. There are many things I can't show her. I need more time to decide what I can and cannot reveal to her, he thought, gently touching his face. This hunt will buy me the time I need to think, Duke Hugo concluded, descending the steps gracefully. He turned towards Lucia, his gaze softening. You don't need to come all the way out here, he said gently, acknowledging her presence. I'll be off now. Lucia watched him quietly, her eyes tinged with sadness. All right, take care, she said softly, offering him a gentle smile. Once the news of Duke Turan's wedding slipped out of a single individual's mouth, it quickly spread throughout high society. Nobody had attended the wedding, so gossip spread like wildfire, fueling public curiosity. Among the shocked individuals was the Crown Prince, Prince Hesse. He tossed a document away in anger. What in the world? She couldn't have just dropped from the sky, he said, holding his head in confusion. She was a princess who became the Duchess. He had started investigating Lucia to find out more about her, but no matter how hard he looked, he couldn't find anything. The only information available was her name and age. The only thing he was able to uncover was a description of her appearance from the maids who worked at the small palace where she stayed before she was married. How challenging, Prince Hesse thought. I've always prided myself on my ability to obtain information and my network of intel, but I can't seem to find anything about her. The Royal Intelligence Department began their investigation by focusing on the palace where Princess Vivian used to live. During the process, they discovered that the maids had been forging records for a long time. The female administrators were forced to take responsibility and were severely punished for their crimes. Apparently, she had been living as a commoner before entering the palace. I sent people to investigate the town she lived in when she was young. But even those who had been close to the princess's mother didn't know much about her or her daughter, Prince Hesse mused. After months of searching, he finally found a letter that Lucia's mother had sent to the palace before her death. He flipped it open to read its contents. On that day, I slept in one bed with the king and gave birth to the princess. Prince Hesse tossed the letter away in anger. There aren't any clues in here other than a few details about their relationship. There's nothing that indicates her mother's identity, he thought, feeling frustrated. He flinched a bit. Was her mother a commoner? He wondered inwardly. Puzzling over the possibility for a while, he slumped into his chair. No, that old man may look like he would sleep around with any woman, but he had particular tastes despite who he was, he thought. He turned his gaze to someone in the room with him. Sir Croton, do you really not know anything? He asked Roy Croton, one of Duke Hugo's trusted subordinates. I know nothing, Croton replied with a smirk. And even if I did know something, I wouldn't tell you, he added, laughing. Is that so? Prince Hesse asked, smiling. I guess there's no fixing that rude attitude of his, he thought. Although I suppose that's his charm, he concluded inwardly. I don't need anything else. I just want to know how they met before getting married. They have nothing in common, the prince said, feeling increasingly furious as he thought about it. Honestly, if I don't find out, I'll die of curiosity, he said, feeling tensed. Roy, observing him, smiled to himself, knowing how they had met. In her manner, Countess Falcon slammed a chair hard against the floor in anger. She stormed into her room, panting with rage. The news of the Duke's marriage had devastated her. Just why? She screamed. Many women had their hearts broken when they heard the news about Duke Turan's marriage, but she was the exception. In any situation, I've always been the exception. I've already been married 3 times. I've never had the desire or dream to marry Duke Taran. I was fine with being his lover, whom he would visit from time to time, she said, her mind casting back to when she first heard the news. Do you hear? Duke Taran is getting married, a lady said to another. I was heartbroken when I heard the news, the second lady replied, sounding sad. He's getting married? Countess Falcon thought inwardly in shock as she stood a few meters away, listening to the ladies' gossip. He'll come find me when he gets bored of his new bride, she thought, feeling delighted with herself, not minding the news. How pitiful, that new bride and the rest of you who have never experienced being his lover. He always comes to me when he gets tired of other women, she assured herself. Then one day, she received a bouquet of yellow roses. It startled her. She trembled upon seeing it. Why did he send me roses? No matter how many times I think it over, I haven't done anything wrong. There must be some sort of mistake. I never contacted him first, and I didn't talk about my relationship with anyone. In fact, I stayed particularly quiet after hearing about his wedding, she thought, looking confused. There was nothing she could do to prevent gossip from spreading, but Duke Taran never even cared about rumors. He's never gone back to any woman who's received yellow roses. Is this truly the end? She asked herself in frustration. No, she said, tossing the roses away angrily. He wants to cut off his lovers now that he's married. But he's never had that kind of clean conscience, Countess Falcon thought, visibly trembling at the thought of it. Countess Falcon snapped angrily, that's right, it's that woman. Was she called Princess Vivian? She must have noticed my relationship with him and forced him to cut ties with me. She gnawed angrily at her finger. That's it, everything makes sense now. He doesn't have feelings for any one woman, so he probably gave in to his wife's plea. I must find out more about this woman, Countess Falcon said, desperation evident in her tone. She wasn't going to bear not being Duke Taran's lover. Meanwhile, somewhere in the kingdom, Ashen stood in front of a carriage. Oh, I'm Ashen, the administrative secretary. Do you remember me, young master? He said with a smile, addressing Damien, the heir to House Taran. The carriage rattled gently along the road as it journeyed back to the north. Secretary Ashen looked a bit tensed, his gaze fixed outside the window. He observed Damien, who sat seemingly uninterested, staring out the window. Phew, just my luck. I can't believe I have to ride in silence like this until we reach Roham, Ashen thought, feeling awkward. He cleared his throat, drawing Damien's attention to him. I hope you've been well. You've grown so much, I almost don't recognize you, he said, wearing a friendly smile at Damien. Damien watched him quietly before abruptly turning his gaze back to the window, puzzling Ashen. I guess that attitude runs in the family, Ashen thought, sweating slightly. His cold demeanor is just like his father's, and they even have the same appearance and aura. There will be no need to test his legitimacy with a magical artifact, he thought, stealing a glance at Damien. What kind of 8-year-old is like this? Anyone would guess that he was at least 3 or 4 years older than his actual age. My cousin is turning 10 this year, but even he's smaller than Damien, Ashen pondered. Well, I guess you'd have to be this big at his age in order to grow up to be the same size as the Duke. Maybe they're actually part of a different race, he speculated. Damien turned his gaze suddenly at Ashen, causing the secretary to flinch. What's the occasion? Damien asked calmly. Pardon? Ashen replied, feeling tense under Damien's scrutinizing gaze. Someone of your position isn't exactly suited to escort me, Damien remarked, startling Ashen with his directness. Ashen looked at him in shock, unsure how to respond. Ashen laughed lightly, easing the tension a bit. That's true, I'm not exactly the right person to be escorting you, he admitted. But that's not really something an 8-year-old should be saying. It's not surprising that he remembers me, but he's even figured out my position, Ashen thought to himself, taking a gulp. The Taran family is quite distinctive, that's apparent to anyone who sees Duke Taran. They're on a different level, Ashen mused internally. Before I got to know Duke Taran, I thought only characters in novels could be smart and strong at the same time. It might seem unfair to say that it simply runs in their blood, but it makes sense in that way. And the world is an unfair place anyway, Ashen thought to himself. Well, it was the Duke's order, he finally said to Damien. Damien watched him with a cold look, twitching slightly. Ashen could sense that Damien's expression seemed to question why the Duke would order such a thing. "I'm sure you've heard the news as well. The Duke recently married a lady and welcomed her as his Duchess," Ashen informed Damien. "Oh," the young boy replied softly, contemplating Ashen's words. Damien thought to himself, "I've been receiving reports quite frequently and in detail about any updates regarding our house." It was Duke Taran's decision that Damien should be privy to all of that information, as it would be necessary for him to one day take on the title. Even though Damien lived in a boarding school isolated from the outside world, he knew the Duke would never accept the excuse that he didn't know. That's why whenever he received a report, he memorized everything related to the house. "This is just my opinion, but I think Duke Taran thought it would be good for you two to get to know each other, now that you're mother and son," Ashen said with a smile. "Mother and son?" Damien thought, looking perplexed. "It looks like I overestimated this person," he thought inwardly, staring at Ashen's tensed face. If that's truly his opinion, then he has absolutely no clue about his master's personality, Damien concluded inwardly. There's no way an 8-year-old can exude this kind of pressure, Ashen thought, sweating profusely. Duke Taran isn't such a thoughtful person. As long as there are no casualties, the Duke wouldn't even care if the Duchess and I went at each other's throats, Damien thought to himself, assessing the situation critically. "Did he say anything else?" Damien asked. "Oh well, he did express his hope that you wouldn't be rude to your mother. He said that you must be polite," Ashen informed him. "Of course, that's his warning not to get cocky and to stay quiet while I'm there. I'm well aware of how insignificant an illegitimate child is. I can't be proudly introduced anywhere until I am entered into the family register, and for my name to be registered, I know that I'll need the Duchess's cooperation. Even if he hadn't warned me, I never planned to butt heads with her in the first place," Damien thought to himself, understanding the situation clearly. "Is she pretty?" Damien asked suddenly, causing Ashen to flinch. "Oh, I haven't gotten many chances to see her myself," Ashen replied to Damien. "If she was pretty, you would have been able to tell from a single glance." "She must not be very pretty," Damien thought inwardly, fixing his gaze back out the window. "I suppose all I need to do is greet my stepmother a few times while I'm in Roam. I'm sure she won't be pleased with me. I'll stay in my room and out of her sight, that way I won't irritate her. And as long as it doesn't endanger my life, I'm prepared to accept any kind of harassment," Damien thought inwardly, resigned to his fate. He wasn't surprised when he heard news of the Duke's wedding. Damien considered his father a rational man who only took action when necessary. "I thought that he must have deemed the marriage to be necessary. I believed that his marriage wouldn't threaten my position as the heir of the house. He may not be a good father, but he is reliable in other ways," Damien reflected. "I don't expect that it'll be more than a week. If I include the time it takes to travel, maybe 3 weeks in total," Damien thought, planning ahead. "In the worst-case scenario, I might have to give up my studies for the entire semester, but I hope that won't happen," he thought, closing his eyes and hoping for the best. "If I'm going to catch up when I get back, I shouldn't waste any time," he resolved inwardly as the carriage continued to rattle gently. Meanwhile, Countess Falcon gnawed at her nails in anger as she held a picture of Lucia. She looked at her face with mixed feelings before dropping the picture on the table. "Princess Vivian," she said inwardly, her eyes filled with hate. "She's not exactly an extraordinary beauty, and she's definitely not his type," Countess Falcon muttered, scrutinizing Lucia's face closely. She had investigated Lucia for a long time before finally finding a record of her attendance at the victory party, which made her suspicious. She was a princess who was basically imprisoned in a side palace. How was she able to attend a party for members of high society? Countess Falcon wondered, her mind racing back to when she demanded answers about Lucia. What about her dress? Her makeup? And her hair? She asked a personnel in frustration. Through her investigation, Countess Falcon had discovered that Lucia often disguised herself as a maid in order to venture outside. She considered Lucia far from an innocent and naive princess who knew nothing of the world. When she first received Lucia's portrait based on descriptions from witnesses, she felt relieved for a while. But as time went on, unease crept in. She may not be his type, but perhaps that could be a reason for him to fall for her, Countess Falcon thought, staring at the picture in her hand. She took a deep sigh, tossing the picture on the table and resting her back against the chair. He may find her interesting for now, but I'm sure that won't last. He will come back to me one day, Countess Falcon said with bitterness. It's a meaningless marriage because he's a man who doesn't know how to love, she added, her eyes still covered by her hand as she glanced once more at the picture. Should I head up north and check without him knowing? She pondered quietly. She wanted to see Lucia in person to confirm that she couldn't satisfy Duke Turan and to soothe her anxiety. However, she knew that unless she used a gate, traveling by carriage would take several months to reach the North Gate. In order to use the Gate of the North, obtaining Duke Turan's approval for such a journey was essential. Even if it's a formal procedure, he could find out that she was the one requesting entry, and if that were to happen, Countess Falcon thought, shivering a bit at the implications. I'm sure the two of them will visit the capital sometime. It would be better to wait until then, she said aloud to herself, contemplating her next move. Why did she disguise herself as a maid? What was she doing outside the palace? Countess Falcon wondered, pondering over Lucia's activities while in the palace. Suddenly, a troubling thought crossed her mind, causing her to tense instantly. Did she have a lover? She thought, her hand covering her mouth in shock. A smirk crossed her lips. That must have been it, a lover, she concluded, answering her own questions. It's possible. I need to find out more, she said inwardly, her determination growing. Meanwhile, at Roam, Lucia was having tea. Did you enjoy riding your horse today, madam? Jerome asked with a smile. Yes, I did, Lucia replied calmly. Emily is such a good girl. She follows my orders very well even though I'm so clumsy. Someone told me today that Emily is worth more than 10 of their own horses, she said, causing Jerome to feel delighted with himself. Emily must be a very expensive horse, Lucia commented. Yes, that is true, Jerome informed her. Lucia couldn't help but feel proud when people praised the horse that Duke Turan had given her. She chuckled, wearing a warm smile. However, her smile soon disappeared as she cast her gaze down to the table, looking a bit sad. When do you think he'll be back? Lucia asked Jerome. Pardon? Jerome replied, momentarily confused. Oh, I'm not sure, but he could be gone for up to a month, Jerome answered, his expression saddened. A month? Lucia exclaimed, sounding shocked. I understand he has some business to handle in his domain, but what exactly is it? She inquired, suddenly curious about Duke Hugo's activities. She had purposely paid little attention to his affairs before, but now she wanted to understand him more. It is a yearly task for my master, Jerome explained. I see, Lucia said softly, absorbing the information. She noticed Jerome wasn't taking his time because he felt uncomfortable around her. Jerome doesn't know that Hugo and I made up, she thought, chuckling inwardly, which puzzled him. As you already know, across the border to the north is the land of the barbarians. They're mostly composed of separate tribes without a leader or union, and they occasionally cross the border to plunder. Every year, an expedition group is sent out to prevent them from moving closer, and as per tradition, the head of House Turan leads the troops. So, he leaves around the same time every year? Lucia asked in surprise. Jerome nodded in confirmation. But for a while, due to the war, my master was only able to send his knights. That may be why the barbarians have increased the frequency of their plundering, Jerome added, filling in more details about Duke Hugo's responsibilities and the current situation across the border. Then the people of the north must constantly be anxious, Lucia remarked, feeling a bit concerned about the situation across the border. Unless they live close to the border, that isn't particularly the case. They think much differently than anyone who views the situation from the outside, Jerome added with a smile. I see, Lucia replied, nodding thoughtfully before taking another sip of her tea. Suddenly, she gasped, causing Jerome to flinch as he looked at her, sensing her tension. Isn't today his birthday, Jerome? Lucia asked, sounding shocked. How could I have forgotten that? Jerome exclaimed, equally surprised. I asked Jerome before he left so that I could remember, but I forgot all about it while we were arguing, Lucia thought, feeling upset. What do I do? She wondered aloud, almost on the verge of tears. You should have told me before he left, she whimpered. He must be fighting the barbarians without even celebrating his birthday, she said sadly. Your Grace, the master has never celebrated his birthday before. In fact, he hated acknowledging it, Jerome explained, causing Lucia to be perplexed at his words. Why? Lucia asked, curious about Duke Hugo's aversion to his own birthday. I'm not exactly sure. However, the master seemed to dislike thinking about his birthday or anything related to his past, Jerome replied sadly, shedding some light on Duke Hugo's feelings about the matter. Does he not have any good memories from his childhood? That's so sad, Lucia thought sadly, resting her face on her hand. I had a difficult childhood, but even I have moments that I treasure. Before I entered the palace, I lived with my mother. We weren't well off, but I was happy, she said inwardly, reminiscing about her own past. She recalled the tragedy of the Western Tower that Jerome had told her about before. How terrible. I must not think of it or even speak a word about it, she had decided. But despite her resolve, whenever she saw the Western Tower, her thoughts involuntarily returned to the incident. As time went by, Lucia couldn't help but wonder what kind of hidden truth could have driven someone to murder their own family members. Why did his brother end up committing such an act? Why? She wondered silently, grappling with the unanswered questions that plagued her mind. Jerome, you said you never saw the late Duke before he passed away, right? Lucia asked him. Yes, I served the master when he succeeded the household, Jerome replied. The late Duke must have been a very cold person, Lucia remarked, fixing her gaze on him. Jerome fell silent for a moment. According to the things I have heard about him, he must have been exactly as you're imagining, he finally told her. I see, Lucia replied softly, falling into deep thoughts about the Duke. His past is full of darkness that can't be spoken about lightly. He never knew the face of his mother, who died after his birth. His father abandoned him after weighing the pros and cons. And then his only brother killed his entire family. He was simply chosen because he was lucky. If he was the one who had been abandoned, perhaps he would have been the one to kill his own family, she thought aloud, contemplating the Duke's tragic history. He told me that House Taran rarely bears children. But if children are so rare, both of the twins should have been raised preciously. The more I think about it, the less sense it makes, Lucia concluded, her thoughts circling around the mysteries and inconsistencies she perceived in Duke Taran's family history. It's the same with Damien. He's a precious heir in a house that has difficulty bearing children, she thought. In Lucia's dream, she never heard anything about Duke Taran having other children. Did he choose Damien as his heir because it's difficult to have more children? If that's the case, there's no reason for him to prevent my pregnancy. If having children is difficult, the answer is to try having as many children as possible, she concluded. Her mind wandered back to her argument with Duke Hugo. His words of him not needing a child echoing through her mind. He didn't say that because he wanted to avoid a political battle between heirs. When he said traces, I could sense a hint of disgust, she said inwardly. Then what about Damien? The woman gave birth to him against his wishes. Even if the child had been unwanted, it isn't the child's fault for having been born. He seems too uninterested in Damien. It's almost as though Damien isn't really his son, she thought before flinching, causing her to be shocked at her thoughts. Lucia reflected on her troubling thoughts, questioning herself internally. What am I thinking? She pondered silently. Jerome's calm voice interrupted her, offering tea, which momentarily distracted her from her thoughts. Later that night, Lucia's maid brought her medication. Madam, it's time for your medicine. I'll leave it here, the maid said, placing it on the table. Lucia observed the new medication, noting Anna's ongoing efforts to find a cure. Despite finding the medicine bitter, Lucia resolved to drink it for Anna's sake. Ugh, it's so bitter, she remarked as she swallowed the medicine. She finished it, reaffirming her commitment to follow Anna's instructions. Now that I think about it, that medicine had a very unique taste, Lucia said, recalling the distinct flavor from her dream. The scent was reminiscent of vanilla, Lucia noted with a tensed look. The following day, she wandered through the castle with a contented expression, enjoying the pleasant weather. The weather is so nice today. Maybe I should have gone horseback riding, she thought. Madam, a maid called out, dashing towards her direction. What is it? Lucia asked, observing the maid panting. It's the young master, he has arrived, she said almost stuttering. Lucia's curiosity piqued. She remained calm, watching the maid with interest. Outside the castle, servants had gathered to welcome Damien. Jerome, with a warm smile, greeted him. "It's been a long time, young master." "I hope you have been well," he said warmly, acknowledging Damien's return. "The long journey must have been exhausting," Jerome continued, trying to lighten the atmosphere. Damien's gaze was sharp as he glanced at Jerome, causing Secretary Ashen to subtly flinch nearby. All the servants and knights appeared visibly surprised, except for Jerome, Damien observed. "Why is he suddenly here?" A servant wondered among the crowd, their gaze fixed on the scene unfolding. Damien noted the varied expressions on the servants' faces. "Long time no see," he said softly to Jerome. Jerome responded, "Have you had lunch yet?" "I'll have it later. After riding a bumpy carriage for hours, my stomach isn't feeling up to it," Damien replied as they ascended the stairs. "Of course, young master. Then allow me to show you to your chamber so you can rest," Jerome offered. Suddenly, Damien sensed someone approaching. He glanced at Jerome before turning around. It was Lucia. He observed her keenly, his eyes unwavering. Lucia stood with her handmaidens, quietly observing him in return. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Lucia," Damien said softly, breaking the silence as they met. "Pardon me for my little introduction, I am Damien," he added with a bow, introducing himself formally. Lucia observed Damien closely, noticing how much he resembled the Duke, except for his smaller stature and younger appearance. "Wow, how can they look so alike? It's not just the red eyes. Apart from being smaller and younger, he is identical to the Duke," she thought to herself, studying his features intently. "I knew it. My theory from back then was too far off. If they look this alike, they have to be father and son," she concluded silently, still fixated on him. Damien, sensing Lucia's silence, began to wonder about her reaction. She must be shocked. Of course, she just got married, but her husband has an illegitimate child. It's obvious that she would be upset, he reasoned inwardly, trying to gauge her response. "Don't tell me she doesn't know that I was announced as the official heir. I wonder how the Duchess will react," Damien pondered further, considering the possible scenarios. "The options are 1. She will be stunned from the shock and glare at me silently. 2. She will be angry and storm off. 3. She will look down at me with disgust as if I am a vile insect. 4. She will slap my face for no reason," he thought, anticipating Lucia's potential reaction with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "Oh, it's nice to meet you," Lucia said calmly, her composed demeanor stunning Damien momentarily. "Is she so shocked that she can't fully grasp the situation? I didn't expect this at all," Damien thought to himself, trying to read Lucia's expression. Damien was accustomed to discerning blatant hostility or attempts to harass him, a skill honed from his time at the academy. But the Duchess must be type who is adept at hiding her emotions. That's much more troublesome, Damien thought as he observed Lucia more closely. Her silence and composed demeanor contrasted sharply with the reactions he had anticipated. He recalled his conversation with Ashen about Lucia's appearance. Why did Ashen hesitate back then? "She's pretty," he concluded. Jerome's voice broke the moment. "Your Grace, the young master wishes to rest since he's been traveling for a long time," he said, drawing Lucia's attention. "Oh, of course he should. I know how tiring a long trip can be," she replied. "It's lunchtime, though. What about your meal?" she asked Damien. "I don't feel hungry," he said politely. "But then you'll have an empty stomach until dinner. You're still growing, and that will be bad for your health," Lucia insisted with a stern look, surprising Damien with her directness. "Prepare a light meal that won't upset his stomach, and make sure to take the same precautions for dinner," Lucia instructed Jerome firmly. "Yes, madam," Jerome replied with a bow before turning to attend to the task. "This way, young master," Jerome said, gesturing for Damien to follow him to his room. Damien bowed courteously before following Jerome. Lucia watched them leave quietly, her thoughts consumed by Damien's presence. "Oh dear goodness. He is so cute," she murmured inwardly, feeling touched. "He's absolutely just a miniature version of the Duke. His face, his blunt attitude, and even that cold expression. It feels like I get to witness his childhood that I missed out on," she thought, her heart beating faster with the realization. "Madam," Jerome called out gently, trying to regain her attention, but Lucia was lost in her thoughts, unable to respond immediately. "Madam?" Jerome called once more. He couldn't help but notice her shock at Damien's sudden arrival. Lucia turned abruptly towards him, causing Jerome to flinch slightly. "Jerome, he told me that he's 8, Lucia asked him." "That's right. He's naturally quite tall though," Jerome replied, feeling a bit tense. "I see. I suppose it wouldn't make sense for the Duke's son to be short," Lucia exclaimed. Jerome fell silent, uncertain of where the conversation was leading. "Are you all right?" Lucia asked him calmly. "What do you mean?" Jerome asked, caught off guard by her question. "It's nothing," she told him, dodging his question. "He's much cuter than I expected. And he seems like a nice boy," she added. "Pardon?" Jerome asked, sounding shocked and disbelieving. Perhaps he was cute when he was little, but not anymore, he thought to himself, watching Lucia's affectionate expressions. "And a nice boy? In what way? Isn't he exactly like the Duke?" They both seemed to have cold blood running through their veins. "I'm starting to get suspicious of her eyesight," Jerome thought inwardly, perplexed by Lucia's perception of Damien. "Would he be uncomfortable if I invited him to dinner?" Lucia said softly, still lost in her fantasy of Damien's cuteness. Jerome watched her with confusion, unsure how to respond. "As long as it's all right with you, madam," he managed to say, though he looked tense. "Of course it is. I'm looking forward to today's dinner," Lucia remarked happily, turning away and leaving Jerome behind. He looked visibly troubled. Her reaction is definitely not normal. This is supposed to be a tragedy. She is just now meeting her husband's son after getting married a few months ago. Does she not understand how serious this is? Perhaps she's unable to process it properly due to shock. Oh, the poor Duchess, Jerome thought sadly. Meanwhile, Ashen tried to tiptoe away quietly. "Sir Ashen," Jerome called out suddenly, causing Ashen to flinch. "I'd like a moment with you," Jerome said, wearing a smile. "With me?" Ashen asked nervously, trembling slightly.
Thank you for joining us on this incredible adventure. If you enjoyed what you watched, please consider liking, subscribing, and ringing that notification bell. Your comments mean the world to us and help us improve. The next episode promises even more excitement and unexpected twists, so stay tuned as we embark on this thrilling journey together. Keep the anticipation alive, and we'll catch you in the next episode.